gotta get them. Before they get us, we gotta get them. Before they get us, we gotta get them. Before they get us, we gotta get them. Before they get us.
I'm sure by now everyone's heard about the WikiLeaks video that's out there now that happened, I think, 2007, where U.S. troops in a helicopter gunned down for fun, basically, and slaughtered unarmed civilians in Iraq. Troops they have no individuality. The first thing you do in drilling troops is to drill out the individuality until they obey is the whole thing, and become like little killing demons. You're training them to be the opposite of what's tolerated within your own society. And you go into the military, and their whole idea is to warp your mind so much that you lose your individuality, turn you into supposedly a killing machine. And these guys are brainwashed. I'm not justifying them either. I don't support troops. I never have in any country supported troops, because I know what happens to them. I know what their purpose is. Remember, Kissinger said, he says that the American troops they're just dumb, stupid animals who are to be used for foreign policy. That's what they are, actually. He was right. He was telling the truth. When you go into the military, you are a dumb, stupid animal who's used for foreign policy, policies which you won't even be told about, you won't even know. You're taught the base level of propaganda to get a job done. You don't care who's benefiting from it, what the real plans are. The big corporations are going to steal everything out of the countries that you're helping to occupy. You don't care. You're quite happy being young and stupid and running around with a gun. You've become G.I. Joe. You now can have the big machine gun and act a hard man, when in real life you're generally a coward on your own. So WikiLeaks came out with this. As I say, they've tried for a while to get it out to the public. They've had a lot of opposition. And they did get a write-up in the dailymail.co.uk about it. It said, fun in the sun, US slaughters unarmed civilians, just like a video game, because that's what it's like to these guys. And I've said year after year after year for many years that the generation that are wearing the uniforms now were brought up specifically with the video games given them in the worst atheistic system that they could possibly devise for them to grow up in, where the state then really gives them their values, which means pretty well no obedience to anybody except their paymaster. And they've been taught with video games to just slaughter whatever figures they see running around like a video game. The games were designed for the military, and when they started to promote them to the public, you could tell right away something was up. Well, 20 odd years later, they've got them in uniform, and they're doing exactly as they've been taught their whole life to do. It's that plain and simple. And that's what the military is about. When you drill, as I say, your individuality is drummed out of you. Any little sarcastic comment to the drill sergeant, and he's on you like a ton of bricks, because he doesn't want you to be a smart aleck. You have to be dumb and stupid and say yes sir, no sir, and all the rest of it. That's all they want out of you, and you jump and you do what you're told. And if you're told to go off and slaughter people, you'll do so. If you're told to torture people, you'll do so. And you want to go off and kill people because you're a little boy who's never grown up yet. You want to be somebody. A big man. I've seen what they call the bloodied photographs of troops from different countries. They always have bloodied photographs. That's their first kill. And each one gets these to keep, you see. And what they'll often do is hold the corpse up or whatever, or sit in it or laugh in it or do some grotesque thing to it to dehumanize it and show how brave they are with a big smile on their face that they're not scared at all, this grisly spectacle. And some of them will even put their finger in the bullet hole that killed their first victim. That's called getting blooded. And they all do that. All your little sons and daughters over there, they come back to you, and you go off to your awful fast food restaurants and that, and talk about the great times you're having, etc. Ask them about their photographs, their blooded photographs. Ask them if you've got the guts to do it, to see if you're still proud of little Johnny. I remember saying on a radio broadcast when they were going into Iraq, just before it, in fact, they showed you some PR shots of troops dancing, American troops dancing on a carrier ship on the way over, half naked, or some of them were naked, I think, to rap music. And I thought, we're sending I said this on the air, we're sending the barbarians in to one of the oldest cultures in the world. That's what it looked like to me. A few years ago I read the statistics from the newspapers on police recruits, and it was over 90% in the US of all police recruits at that time were coming directly from the military into police, where once again they'll be allowed to throw off the normal restraints of societal control, and get turned loose on you and do what they want. Most people still today think that all entertainment to do with movies, drama, is therefore nothing more than their entertainment. It never ever was that case.
Of course, television can't perform such miracles as this, yet. But perhaps there's no harm wishing that it could.
The greatest social messages are promoted through movies and drama, high drama, through the fixation of emotive sequences, emotional sequences, not logical, factual sequences, but pushing points across in an emotional way which register and fix in the mind. So emotional content is very, very important, rather than going through an actual discussion or an argument using logic and facts. There's no debate. And when you're being downloaded through fiction, your guard is down, the censor part of your brain is not in action. It isn't saying, yes, I agree with this, I disagree with that, as you would in a debate or a lecture. You're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with new ideas. About 100 years ago, this big organization with many branches, they wanted to rule the world basically using Britain as a nucleus of a system, an embryo, which also was going to be joined with the US under the Anglo-American establishment, wrote about the kind of culture and the changes of culture over a 100-year period that they would actually design, implement and bring in. And H.G. Wells talked about it too. He talked about arenas. He says arenas could be put up across the world for sports, for instance. Now at that time, sports was something that children, school children were into. Adults became adults and got onto adult things. So it was unimaginable at the time that people could actually believe that there was even a need for adult sports and entertainment, never mind having arenas built across the world. But he said we can do this, and foist basically a sports culture for the males. Using a tribal system. We're all tribal to an extent, that's why we even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood, that's why we're supplied with these leaders. And because the average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny as the expert class arose, it was decided that the males would get their outlet basically, gradually becoming helpless as males through sports. Therefore they'd have a tribal team they could identify with, they could cheer them on as they were winning. In their own personal lives they were getting nowhere, they were getting disenfranchised in a sense as experts took over decision making for them in all kinds of fields. So this was psychology at use, planned before they even implemented the sports.
That's why they pay athletes these fantastic salaries. I was listening to the radio the other day. They just contracted to pay one player on one team $6 million a year. Can you believe this?
And why is that?
It's the Roman circus. What does the emperor do when the people become restive, and when the people are asking questions, and when the people don't like the policies of the emperor? He sends them to the circus. He creates a circus. He builds a giant coliseum. And he begins to throw the Christians to the lions. And he has great chariot races and football games and basketball games, all to keep the idiots preoccupied with things that don't mean anything in the scheme of the entire world, so that they don't have the time to learn what the truth is, so they don't ever get smart enough to learn how they're being manipulated, so they don't ever question the emperor. That's why they pay a player on a football team or a baseball team $1 million or $2 million or $3 million a year. It is the Roman circus. I know men who don't know anything in the world except who plays third base for the Mets. And they think that's a great accomplishment. And they meet and pat each other on the back and bond and go have cocktails and talk about what this guy that plays third base for the Mets did in last night's game. It's sad. It's really sad.
When radio came along, of course, they used that to the maximum. Sports for the men, soaps basically for the women, and then in came television, as I say, with its alpha state, its hypnotic state. And sure enough, around the 1960s, really, 50s and 60s, it took off. It really, really took off. And men became glued on Saturday nights to the sports shows. A culture industry, which is called by its own the culture industry. The Soviet Union had a department called the culture industry. Their actors and directors were called the cultural leaders, because they would, like a computer, people are like computers, all you have to do is keep giving them new updates every so often, and you can change an entire country or a nation or a block of nations who are all getting the same upgrades at the same time along certain paths. Today we call it political correctness. Most people want to belong to their peer group. They want to be the same as everyone else when it comes to opinions. In fact, they judge their own personal sanity by bouncing ideas off their neighbors and friends who will answer back and agree on these same topics in kind. It doesn't matter if the topics or what you're given are facts or utter nonsense, as long as everyone agrees at the same time. You'll say, well, I'm sane, and your friends will all agree because they've had the same information given to them. If it's on TV and a famous face says something, then it must be true. He doesn't have to show you facts or anything else. You've been brought up with these faces. That's why they keep these guys on television into their 70s and 80s. You've grown up with this father figure who's on television every night at 6 o'clock, in your house, in your room, staring right at you, and he's a father figure. Would he tell you a lie? So you naturally never suspect him. And this same man will lead you through new topics. He'll introduce experts on the topics. They'll have a little summary at the end of every talk, and you are now left with the conclusion that's presented to you. You don't arrive at it, it's given to you, and it's good enough for you. We're programmed today perfectly, just like machines.
This is the best day of my life!
We tie this in with the Brzezinski. Brzezinski said in 2 Ages. Now this guy was way up with the NSA. He's a master geopolitician. He admits he works in 20, 50-year periods to do with geopolitics in other countries. But he said himself, the public will shortly be unable to think or reason for themselves. He was meaning by that the form of information that was given to them, the type, the formulas that were in use then in the 1970s. He says, eventually they'll be unable to think or reason for themselves. And eventually, he said, they will expect the media to do all their thinking and reasoning for them. Well, that's happened today. That's why people today can't think outside of the programming from television.
Is there any room in in a kind of society where these manipulations are not taking place for this type of entertainment or any type of entertainment at all?
If people understand that a game is a game, if people understand that nobody, no matter what they do, is worth paying $2 or $3 million a year for. People should be able to get rich if they want to, by the sweat of their individual labor. Okay? By going out and doing something for the world. Not by taking people's minds away from the emperor. It's a game. Football's a game. Football's a game. But let me tell you something. When 150 of the most powerful men and women in the world can meet in secret in Baden-Baden, Germany, and plot the fate of billions, and nobody even cares about it, but 6 football players go to lunch together, and it's in the headlines across the country, you have a reflection of the society in which that exists. And it is a sick society that is doomed to self-destruction.
So based on that scenario, there's some truth into what these men are looking at.
Absolutely, and that's what makes me so sick, is that I'm trying to wake up a people who on a daily basis are proving the ones that I'm warning them about to be right.
Well, so that even though a minority, there are people out there that you recognize are awake to this, if they don't do something about it, they will lose that ability to be free in that way.
That's correct.
Whether they might think, well, I don't need to worry about it because I know what I know and I'm fine.
That's
it doesn't
right.
work that way. There's a connection here to everything.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. A nation of people who are willing to send their sons and daughters that they profess that they love to a foreign country to die, and they use the excuse to themselves that they're sending them off to defend our country, and they know damn well that's a lie, are doomed.
This is a scientific dictatorship which Bertrand Russell said, and the Huxleys said, both Aldous and Julian Huxley said they would bring in the scientifically controlled society.
Well, now, in regard to this problem of the ultimate revolution, this has been very well summed up by the moderator. In the past, we can say that all revolutions have essentially aimed at changing the environment in order to change the individual. I mean, there's been the political revolution, the economic revolution, in the time of the Reformation, the religious revolution. All these aimed, as I say, not directly at the human being, but at his surroundings, so that by modifying the surroundings you did achieve, at one remove, an effect upon the human being. Today, we are faced, I think, with the approach of what may be called the ultimate revolution, the final revolution, where a man can act directly on the mind-body of his fellows. Well, needless to say, some kind of direct action on human mind-bodies has been going on since the beginning of time. But this has generally been of a violent nature. The techniques of terrorism have been known from time immemorial, and people have employed them with more or less ingenuity, sometimes with the utmost crudity, sometimes with a good deal of skill acquired by a process of trial and error, finding out what the best ways of using torture, imprisonment, constraints of various kinds. Well, it seems to me that the nature of the ultimate revolution with which we are now faced is precisely this, that we are in process of developing a whole series of techniques which will enable the controlling oligarchy, who have always existed and presumably always will exist, to get people actually to love their servitude. This is, seems to me, the ultimate in malevolent revolution, shall we say. And this is a problem which has interested me for many years, and about which I wrote 30 years ago a fable, The Brave New World, which is essentially the account of a society making use of all the devices at that time available, and some of the devices which I imagined to be possible, making use of them in order to, first of all, to standardize the population, to iron out inconvenient human differences, to create, so to say, mass-produced models of human beings arranged in some kind of a scientific caste system. A number of techniques about which I talked seem to be here already, and that there seems to be a general movement in the direction of this kind of ultimate revolution, this method of control by which people can be made to enjoy a state of affairs which, by any decent standard, they ought not to enjoy. The enjoyment of servitude.
Here's a CNN poll from February the 26th, 2010. The majority says government's a threat to citizens' rights. No kidding, I'm glad they've noticed something. From CNN, it says, Washington, a majority of Americans think the federal government poses a threat to rights of Americans, according to a new national poll. 56% of people questioned in a CNN Opinion Research Corporation survey released Friday say they think the federal government's become so large and powerful that it poses an immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens. 44% of those polled disagree. The survey indicates a partisan divide on the question. Only 37% of Democrats, 63% of independents, and nearly 7 in 10 Republicans say the federal government poses a threat to the rights of Americans. According to CNN poll numbers released Sunday, Americans overwhelmingly think the U.S. government is broken, though the public overwhelmingly holds out hope that what's broken can be fixed. I've often used that analogy that it's like a Tower of Babel. It's rotten from the foundations, and it's held together in its crooked way, and with so much bandages and Scotch tape and all the rest of it, that you can't fix something that's crooked from its foundations. It's faulty from the very basic. CNN Opinion Research Corporation poll was conducted February the 12th to the 15th with 1,023 adult Americans questioned by telephone. The survey's sampling error is plus or minus 3% points for the overall survey, it says here. Now, there was an article which kind of shows you where we've gone as society too. It was from a Sunday feature from the BBC, From Game Boy to Armageddon. And it says, I don't know if it was showed last weekend or what, because I don't have the exact date on it here. War games are sold as military history, but something has begun to change as war and play converged to create what some call the military entertainment complex. Good term, isn't it? But it's always been that way. Ken Hollings pushes the button on this latest phenomena. Men have always played at and with soldiers. Gaming has been an essential part of warfare, and by the 19th century it had been developed into the sophisticated Kriegspiel derived from the still influential theories of von Clausewitz and played at military colleges in both Europe and America. These war games then became real games for tabletop strategists by the early 20th century. Now, I'll come back to this article after the following break. Hi folks, this is Alan Watt. We're cutting through the matrix, reading an article from Game Boy to Armageddon. It says here, it's talking about war games basically, and how Hollywood is totally integrated with the military-industrial complex, and it really has always been that way. They used Hollywood for World War II they turned out hundreds of these awful movies where every GI was called Joe for some reason, And literally, hi Joe, I'm hit. Oh, I'll get over there, Joe. All right, everybody was Joe. But anyway, and of course the bad guys could never shoot straight in these propaganda wars, just to make the guys going into it thinking they were pretty safe. But it says here, a remarkable synergy developed between colleges of war and devisers of such games, particularly in America, and the think tanks of the Rand Corp. Gaming theory was used intensively to plot the future of war and nuclear destruction. But from the late 70s, computer strategy games started to form a powerful loop between gamers and warriors. With the creation of the SimNet, S-I-M-N-E-T, the military began to develop hugely powerful simulators, and now convergence is taking place between military and the entertainment industry. Some say we are living in what Stanford professor Tim Lenoir has called the military entertainment complex, with military functions increasingly taking place online using simulation for training and in the treatment of soldiers suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. But is this new realm of war truly a revolution, the shape of things to come, or just more virtual bangs for real bucks? Well, it's more than that, because you see, war games and simulation were used even during World War II, and I think they first used them for the gunners that was the first real sort of gaming idea. And when the planes would come in, it's all virtual reality, only it was done with screens and film, and now they're using computers. But the whole idea too was just to make people desensitized to killing people. Normal folk don't normally kill people, and they have to find ways of desensitizing you so you kill automatically, in a Pavlovian reflex basically. And that's why they invented the video games in the first place, by the military complex. Then they first used them with the military. Now they're into society. They have been for 20 odd years for a good reason. It's because they wanted that generation to grow up and go into the military to finish off this part of the New World Order. And they've been very, very successful at it, in fact. Now, it's another thing that ties in with this. And I got to laugh at the media when they come out with these ridiculous articles. This here is from the Checkup. It says, study links violent video games to violent thought and action. Well, gee, who'd have thunk, eh? Who'd have thunk? I just found this out, you know what. A study in the March issue of Psychological Bulletin, a journal of the American Psychological Association, shows that playing violent video games increases violent thinking, attitudes and behaviors among players, and it does nothing to promote positive social behaviors. Well, my goodness, it's astonishing, isn't it? It takes the scientists to... thank goodness they're there to tell us this stuff, because we have no common sense. We can't see it for ourselves, obviously. Psychologist Craig Anderson of Iowa State University and his team analyzed existing studies of 130,000 people from the US, Europe and Japan. His findings held for players in Western and Eastern cultures, for male and female players, and for players of various ages. They also contradict some earlier studies whose finds the current authors say are tainted by selection bias, the method by which they selected studies to analyze. The new studies notes that while violence in movies and TV shows has long been examined for its potential impact on viewers' proclivity for violence, video gaming, a much newer phenomenon, has not yet been so fully explored. And that's nonsense, because, as I say, we're guided through what they call entertainment of all kinds as to how we act and behave. And when little Johnny's been playing on these video games, and he's sitting on the floor with his mouth open, totally enraptured as he's killing off whatever he's killing off, that's all it's about. And Mummy says to him, Johnny, come and have your dinner, and he has a temper tantrum or really has an outburst. It's because he's in a battle, you see. And he's going from killing and fighting for his life into obeying Mum. It doesn't quite mesh, and this is well understood and always has been. This is in an accompanying commentary. Christopher Ferguson and John Kilburn of the Department of Behavioral Applied Science and Criminal Justice at Texas A&M International University note flaws in Anderson's analysis, including what they say is his own selection bias. So then they go on to bash another scientist as they bring out their new studies with their new scientists, and as an in-house kind of thing. But basically, they come up with the same old stuff, which is kind of, it might be and it might not be bad for causing aggression and so on and so on. And I can't be bothered reading the rest of it, because these kind of articles bore me to tears. Common sense should prevail, and it's something we're being taught not to have anymore, or ignore, I should say.
And to kick off tonight, I always sit down and then I think for a minute and I decide what I'm going to talk about. And tonight I was thinking about something I mentioned earlier this week, and that is how video games affect people. It affects the children, because that's who it's designed to affect primarily, at least initially, to wean them on it and make them grow up with this ability to just kill that target on command. That's what it's all about. These were designed, these programs, by the military industrial complex. And they came out really as far back as the 1950s and 60s, and definitely stepped up in the 70s. Before they gave the internet to the public, they had meetings in the main war departments in various European countries, but mainly in the United States, in the Pentagon, to do with how they could keep prolonged warfare going with generations of youngsters who were growing up, who were perhaps disinhibited towards going to war. And they saw that with the problems with Vietnam. Some of the present players that also belong to the New American Century organization are now in power. And the same players back then were involved with think tanks on ways to encourage youngsters to get back into a war-type mode, to breed up generations who would be gung-ho for war and who would be desensitized enough and kept immature enough, basically, that they wouldn't see those enemies as targets, and they also wouldn't think of themselves as being killed. Now, if every young person who went to the military had a guarantee they were going to be killed, I guarantee you'd have nobody in the military, like someone with an extreme death wish. And so they came up with video games as a way for desensitizing the public, because they foresaw this war against movements, big movements that were forming, first scattered movements, independent from each other, to do with rights and civil rights and human rights and so on. They saw this ongoing war against these groups, and if they got their own way, eventually they'd take down this kind of system and bring in a different system. And they slapped everyone with the label of communist. Because in reality, we've been run by an oligarchy for a long, long, long time. An oligarchy, as Carl Quigley said in his book Tragedy and Hope, and the Anglo-American establishment, who've been controlling this for a long time. And I'll be back with more about this after the following messages. I'm Alan Watt, back with Cutting Through the Matrix, and I'm talking about how video games were designed to create generations of people who would eventually become soldiers, because the games were initially used to desensitize recruits in the military long before we heard of computers and so on. And in fact, you can go back into the records of the training manuals of the U.S. Army. There's only one instance. They'd already done it in Europe for centuries, and the U.S. had to copy their methods, but they were using methods long, long ago to desensitize recruits, and so that they'd kill more efficiently, because they found out, even as far back as the Civil War, that in some of the major battlefields, maybe only 17 out of every 100 actually fired their muskets, the ones who were dead, and they'd pick up these muskets on the field and check if they were fired or not. So they were deciding ways that they could actually train people and create a war type of culture so they could always recruit ongoing, if need be, with every generation. And this was a stepped up, especially after and during the Vietnam era. It's no news today that they're going into using drugs on the military to create the new type of drug-induced aggressive soldier. They've tried that out. They tried that back in Vietnam with particular drugs. You see the movie called Jacob's Ladder. It's well worth seeing, because the drug they mentioned in there that they sprayed from helicopters was actually used in Vietnam. It was designed initially to make them very, very aggressive, and they tried it on monkeys first of all before they tried it on soldiers, and the monkeys literally ripped their limbs off each other. And this is the sort of thing the military's into, because they don't care about the average trooper. That's just to get them in as recruits. They just want you to go off and kill people. And if you get killed on the way, you're just a number anyway. There's always another one to come on behind you. So they used video games, initially created for the military, put together by psychologists and professionals and tremendous understanding of the human mind, with histories to back it all up too, of warfare techniques and so on, and what gets imprinted on your brain. And imprinting is very important with games, and with other things too, as the advertising industry, sex sells, for instance, and you mix sex with violence, and you certainly have got quite the combination there, because all the primitive aspects in the limbic system come to the surface and manifest themselves, and this is all really well understood in the high sectors of the military in all countries. Now, I had a letter from a woman who's trying to help a youngster who was addicted to these video games. I'm going to read it and keep the names out. And it says, Dear Alan Watt, if anyone knows this, you do. I need any info that shows that violent computer games and films and music produce unbidden flashbacks or visions of violence. Well, the answer to that is, there's a fact, yeah. This is known. The problem is most of the information, although it's out in the higher psychological circles at universities, most of it's kept from the public, general public. They don't talk about this in the general media. It says, as you know too well, the current generation has been reared on violent video games formerly reserved for military and police training to help the trainees overcome their natural aversion to killing. Today's 18-year-olds were introduced in preschool to stalking people with weapons. And that's what it is. They're getting taught to stalk people, to hunt them down with weapons. The full array of books, TV, and music by constant connection to either the internet, the iPod, radio, cell phones is what they are offered when they become teenagers. Along with this are pop psych courses on mental pathology, health courses on pathology, the pathology of the environment. Along with that are do-it-yourself mental health assessments and parties for teens to fill out these questionnaires to see if they are psychotic, obsessive, compulsive, or something else pathological. I'm trying to help an extremely gifted young man who spent many hours playing video games and who had sudden visions of violence out of the blue that concerned him. He never acted on violence and in fact has been known for his compassion and willingness to help others, even doing sacrificial things to help others. He recognized game playing as an addiction when he was 10 years of age, and gave the games up for a year almost. He played them sometimes, he said, when his stepbrother, but he decided to go back to the games a year later. He avoided things like Grand Theft Auto and believed he was exercising some prudence, but he virtually admitted this was an addiction. A year and a half ago, he got into heavy metal music in several bands with names like Incubus and Succubus. He began watching Nip Tuck and CSI, and I've talked about these types of programs before, which both dissect bodies while playing almost, and listen to this, and it's true, listen to this, hymnal music, just like hymns in the background if you listen to it. It's almost like a sacred act as they dissect these bodies. He began going to films with killing sprees in the the movies. He took tests to see if he was sociopathic or psychopathic. I told him sociopaths and psychopaths have no conscience, feel no remorse or shame, have no compassion, have no sense of justice. This boy was said by teachers to have these two abnormally developed degree. It's truly a statement on our times when a child can be said to be abnormal for having these qualities as of compassion and so on. The traits still exist, although the boy is trying to override them. He recently demonstrated great remorse for a time, redirected his actions. He's in touch with friends and chat room associates who've been raised on these psychological diagnoses as well as a psychotic culture fare. These contacts reorient him to that disorienting world. As I look back on my own teen years, I recall the surprises my generation got when our free choice, supposedly free choice to take LSD turned out to be not so free. First, people learned that they couldn't do something as simple as go to sleep when they wanted to because the drug kept them up. Then they found that flashbacks would come out of nowhere. Later, of course, we found that the drug that was supposed to help us make an anti-establishment statement had been delivered to everyone by the established government, and that's true. That was who was behind. Actually, your security services working for the government, that's who was behind bringing the drugs in. So I compared that with the computer game violence that this generation has been absorbing since preschool, and these visions of violence, and wondered if, like LSD, these produced flashback experiences out of the blue. But because they aren't game story related, children that have them believe these are their own personal visions of violence and conclude that there must be something sociopathic or psychotic with them. Have you come across information along these lines in your research? I've read that people find themselves addicted but have not seen anything about the violent visions spontaneously happening in children or teenagers or anything relating to computer game residue. How can it not happen that way? A person is mugged, he or she will have flashbacks of the event. Anyone who has experienced a violent assault or disruptive experience will have them. These so-called games are an assault on children's tender minds and on teenagers' developing minds, and the experiences take place for hours at a time, day after day, throughout their formative years. And that's one of the many types of letters I get to do with people who understand and see what's happening to the youngsters. And what they, as I say, what they might not know is that there are people, lots and lots of people, who are employed by government agencies who are working hand in glove with the makers of these big violent video game, mainly from Japan. Japan's a big player. They lead the field in altering the cultures of people. They have specialists in all different mental health areas working on these things. And it really is U.S. companies and British companies and other international companies that are based in Japan that take the lead and then market it to the children. And what do you tell relatives and friends when they do what everyone else does? And that's buy your child one of these games for birthdays or Christmas, or what do? Do you accept it and let them do it, or do you ignore what your child does anyway? Most will just simply ignore it, thinking everyone's doing it, so it must be all right. But these games are literally meant to desensitize your children from killing and the acts of killing. I spent the last few days going over a lot of the photographs you don't get on the mainstream news, where they show you the sanitized war, smart bombs, and soldiers giving out chocolate to children. And it's what the American troops and the British too and others are doing over in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it's awfully disgusting. Incredibly disgusting. But at the same time, it's what I expected. I knew what was going on because they have raised on purpose the generation, the particular generation, to do exactly what they're doing. They created the culture for them. They gave them their morality, if you like. just like Bertrand Russell said they would do from kindergarten onwards. And they also gave them video games which were designed initially years ago, long before we had the internet, designed for the military alone, because it was to desensitize soldiers so they would kill their target without thinking, without even having any idea, really, there's a real human being there. That was just a target to kill on impulse, a Pavlovian-type training. And that's why they had the big push many years ago now to give this kind of game-playing role to the children, to bring them up on it, to desensitize them. And now, of course, they're coming out and admitting that in some of the papers. Not only admitting it, but telling us we're going to push it further, and that the military-industrial complex and the governments are behind it because they want a militarized, desensitized next generation to take over and perhaps be even more ruthless, because this is to be 100 years war, like Mr. Rumsfeld said. We should listen to what they say, because these characters, in amongst all the lies they give us, will tell us little things, little statements they make, where they tell us the true psychopathic truth. And we ignore it, because we don't want to hear it. It's the bad news. And I'll be back with more of this bad news and telling you what's behind it after the following messages. With cutting through the matrix. And just to confirm what I've been talking about for a long time, in that the culture you live in is basically promoted and indoctrinated into you. There's nothing in it that doesn't have a purpose that serves elite, nothing at all. There's nothing in it whatsoever for you. You're taught to think there is. You're taught to think you just compete with everyone else, and you get to the top, and nothing is further from the truth. Even your hobbies and the things that you do are promoted to you, and your children are indoctrinated from kindergarten onwards, and you even buy them the games that they demand from you, because the advertising industry, insurers, through their cartoons and all the rest of it, these video games are shown, and they'll demand it from you. Everything is highly manipulated. And in Australia, it's already, I think, the 22nd. But getting back to this particular newspaper, it's from the I think it's the Sydney newspaper by Fran Malloy is the one who's written this up for this Sydney. I think it's Morning Herald, they call it. And let's see if we can get it. Yeah, Sydney Morning Herald, 22nd, that will be, because I say they're ahead of us. And it said here, various commentators have accused Generation Y, those born after 1981, of being disrespectful, constantly distracted, unable to live without a mobile phone, contemptuous of authority, cynical and precocious. A more unlikely batch of soldiers just couldn't be imagined. But this much maligned generation is precisely the target that the U.S. and Australian defense forces are homing in on their efforts to keep the war on terror well manned, and their key recruitment strategy, the humble video game. Now this goes for Britain and all the Commonwealth countries, Canada, and the U.S. as well. In fact, they just had a military tank, a couple of days ago come up Yonge Street in Toronto with some cup that some team had won. So that once again, they're using that as an advertising promo for recruits. So a tank going up Yonge Street certainly dispels Canada's old image of a peace-loving country. But I'll continue with this this newspaper article. It says here, their key recruitment strategy, the humble video game. More than 3,800 U.S. soldiers have been killed in action since the war in Iraq began more than 5 years ago. And as the conflict drags on with no end in sight, the U.S. military is running desperately short of the 80,000 new recruits it needs each year. As a horrific reality of the bloody conflict that tears potential recruits back home, it seems that the U.S. Army is pinning its hopes on a video game to solve one of George Bush's biggest headaches. America's Army is at www.americasarmy.com. It's a key component of a drive by U.S. forces to sell military careers to an increasingly cynical young demographic who ignore billboards and TV advertisements, and who, by being plugged into the internet, fly firmly under the radar of traditional marketing. Military recruitment has huge support from the U.S. government, and ain't that a fact? Controversial legislation passed in 2001 compels high schools to release contact numbers of graduating students to recruiters. Your personality profile will be in there too, so they'll know exactly who to hit on you to get you in. But with an estimated 73% of U.S. teenagers surfing the web at least weekly, nowhere is youth more readily accessible than in the gaming space. And with more than 8.6 million users registering to play since 2002, America's Army is successfully hitting its mark. The game is a realistic and immersive tactical first-person shooter, a free download with online multiplayer capabilities and extensive input from some of the world's top game developers. Reviewers have raved about the high production values with sound effects and visual detail among its best in its genre. The game requires a relatively significant commitment of time. Experienced gamers estimate that it takes at least 2 hours to go through the training modules before you can log on to play the game. The realism of the game is no surprise given its source. Then it goes on to list a lot of the other ones who participated in creating this game, and it's all the biggies. And it goes on to tell you that the U.S. military is putting lots and lots of money into this, and so is the American government. So, of course, will be the British, Australian, and every other Commonwealth country government. They're putting money into video games to get the children hooked on a fantasy, and also to train them to just kill the enemy target. And when they go over abroad, and no doubt in this game they'll be using the clothing of the target that they'll eventually be set against. That's the kind of world we're living in now. And you think you're all free. You think that your children are free. And here you are being indoctrinated and allowing your children not just to be indoctrinated, but to be basically brought up with a military mentality and a killer mentality. And you think that's okay. It's astounding. It's astounding to me to know what I know and to have read all the old books of how they were going to scientifically create this reality all around us through indoctrination from a very early age and ongoing indoctrination through television for the adults. And has it ever been successful? Because the average person is so out of touch, so incredibly out of touch with the only true reality there is, that it's a different world altogether. They cannot tell fact from fiction anymore. Most people have watched so many gory movies and blood movies and guts movies put out by Hollywood, and Hollywood itself has admitted a few years ago they were getting massive funding from the Pentagon to put these war movies out, by the way. You cannot be entertained today and enjoy it. If you watch any of these movies, you have to sit and analyze them. As soon as you identify with the characters, you've lost it and you're being indoctrinated. You're downloading into you. That's what's happening. And people today, as I say, have no idea what's really going on. They hear the sanitized, sterilized stuff that comes across the mainstream news. and they haven't seen their heroes over there booting children, booting them as they come out houses because they're not going fast enough, and knocking them to the ground, or hitting them with their rifle butts, and that kind of stuff. They don't see that. It's all sanitized news you get. So they think everything is some sort of big Hollywood production with John Wayne in it, where everyone has 1950s morality or something. And even that was all fake, because again, it was Hollywood. But that's what they've done. They've given the adult generation that's got the children a completely fake reality. And they're actually training your children to go up and grow up to be soldiers. Soldiers who will fight for a cause that they won't even care about. They won't care why about anything. They just want to wear that uniform and be like the warriors in the Star Wars movies, faceless, armor-clad beings, just numbers that do what they're told and shoot and kill. That's the unfortunate part of it. And not to stop there, the suicide rate within the army is shot up, and it's 3 times higher than the 6,000 odd per year they're telling you. And that's not attempted, that's suicide. That's successful. Now, another report's just come out where they've talked about autopsies on the brains of a lot of these troops. And they found the frontal lobe part of the brain has shrunk. My, what would cause that? And so the experts are stumped. They think, it could be Gulf War, this mysterious Gulf War syndrome or something. And they forget all about the testing even as far back in Vietnam, and repeated in Jane's magazine and others since then, the official military equipment magazine, on the Pentagon's desire and striving towards the super soldier through chemical means, eventually becoming cyborg, but first through chemicals. The Canadian troops who were in Somalia, this is from a documentary on the CBC News, that's a government-owned station. That's like this BBC for Canada. Talked to some of the troops back from Somalia a few years ago, and they all complained of massive hallucinations during their whole tour there. They put it down to, this is what they told the public, they put it down to the new type of anti-malarial drug they were being given, which the French themselves had banned because of these effects. And one soldier said he couldn't believe what he'd done afterwards because he was hallucinating through all these colored scenes, just like LSD, and going through villages and pulling his pistol out and pointing them at children's heads, wondering whether to pull the trigger or not, just for fun. You see, soldiers are disposable. You find most presidents have utter contempt for them. Contempt because they know the mentality of them. And the mentality isn't too high. It's juvenile. It's juvenile. And it's kept that way and reinforced now with conditioning. And I'll be back with more about it after the following messages. Through the matrix and trying to shatter some of the conditioning you've had by trying to make people more empathetic to their own children. It seems to have lost contact altogether, which was always the plan, of course, according to Bertrand Russell and others, Aldous Huxley, etc. All the ones who worked for Tavistock, they've been pretty successful. And before going to callers, I'm just going to read a little bit more from this article that I was reading from. And it says, and this game is having an impact. America's Army has consistently been rated by GameSpy in the global top 20 most popular online games, with thousands of players logged on around the clock. The online gaming world, dominated by products such as Quake and Half-Life, America's Army rates as a strong contender with 24 updates to the PC version released. It goes on and on and on. It says here, it tells you right here, it says this is just a game, it's a propaganda tool. It says, while it may rate up there with the best in gaming, America's Army is not an exercise in largesse towards the gaming community. It's essentially a propaganda tool funded to the tune, listen to this, of more than $10 million U.S. of taxpayers' money, it says here, designed to attract young people to military life. Attract, notice, to condition them into going. Just like Manchurian Candidate, there'll be buzzwords, etc. in those games, and they'll hear the recruiters use them, and in they'll go. So the U.S. Army spends an estimated $5 million annually to support the game. A drop, that's just to support it, that's not just to create it, $10 million initially. A drop in the U.S. $583 million ocean of the Army's recruitment advertising budget last year. But the modest expense is reaping big dividends, with 28% of players clicking through the U.S. Army's recruitment site, and about 40% of the new U.S. Army recruits in 2005 having played the game before signing up. And of course you think advertising indoctrination doesn't work, eh? You're too clever for that. It won't affect you, will it? So people should look into it, into this particular article. I'll put it up on my site. And read it for yourself. Unfortunately, most people have little memory today. They can't retain too much. And after they've read it, they'll be shocked, and then they'll forget it and watch the sports or watch military tanks coming up Yonge Street in Toronto with a cup on commemoration of some team that won some game somewhere, because these guys like to play with balls. This is grown men playing with balls. What does that tell you? Now, whenever anything is released to the public to buy, to purchase, to use at home, it's technically obsolete. And yet we've taught this is the latest gadget, whatever the gadget happens to be. I've gone into the video games, for instance, and I've asked you to think, why on earth would games that were designed for the military establishment be so heavily funded, incredibly heavily funded by government institutions, using your tax money to bring out more and more vicious games and to make children want to enter, to really want to enter a different world of reality. I'll be back with much more of this after the following messages. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt, and we're cutting through this matrix. It's very important we cut through now because we're going into it big time. And I have a feeling that once into it, most people will be just like the characters in the Matrix movie. They'll think that's real life. They won't know the difference. The transition won't be that gradual enough, but they'll actually go into it. And they're aiming at the young, as I say, always at the young. And in many of the writings put out by Aldous Huxley and others, they talked about creating a world. This wasn't Huxley's idea. He just worked for this establishment that planned this future. But he said that most people are unhappy, therefore we'll make them happy. We'll give them a type of Big Brother type society where everything's taken care of for them, and we'll use drugs and so on, and various scientific methods to control the people and keep them happy, keep them ordered. Because the greatest thing they fear at the bottom happens to be independent thinkers. They're not worried about weaponry because they have such high-tech weaponry at the top and chemical weaponry and various types of weaponry. They don't worry about weapons at the bottom. Everything you have is obsolete. So, but they really care about thoughts that can spread like wildfire. That's important. So they want to extinguish those with that fire inside them and bring everybody into a matrix-type society with use of drugs and psychological techniques and advanced sciences. And here is where the games are going, the games. And this is from the Sunday Times to do with the virtual reality games. Now remember, as I say, everything that's given to the public went through the military establishments first. anything that can be used to change or alter society in any way at all in culture is tried, tested, and approved, and when we get it, it's almost obsolete. They're on to the next phase. So this is the Sunday Times, November 25th, 2007, and it's in their news tech and web news gadgets and gaming section. This is by Alex Pell and Christopher Goodwin. It says, think carefully before you answer. It's a device that is capable of reading people's minds, fact or fantasy. We knew you'd say that, but scientists at an American laboratory have been brainstorming the same question for more than 5 years and have come up with a mind-blowing different answer. They call it Epoch. When it is launched early next year in Britain and the US, it will probably be known simply as the mind-reading helmet, capable supposedly of knowing what users are thinking. The device is being hailed as a revolutionary breakthrough in the way that humans will be able to interact with computers. This is the interfacing. We're getting everyone trained to go into the interface, but the young will adapt to it very quickly, and then the next bunch will go even further. Its implications are massive, opening the possibility that one day people will be able to control everything from light switches to the cursor on their computer screen by simply thinking about it. Yeah, but they don't tell you that you won't be programming it. Someone will be programming you. However, for now, the technology will be used as the ultimate gimmick to play computer games simply by thinking your screen characters into action. Emotive systems. Now, emotive, it refers to emotion, and there's more to this I'll go into later. The San Francisco company that has developed the technology says Project Epoch could mean the end of joysticks and keyboard bashing. Instead, game players will be able to visualize a move in their head that will move, and that move will be replicated on the screen in front of them. So, for example, Harry Potter could be ordered to cast exotic spells, or a Jedi might exert the Force to fling his enemies around, all through the willpower of the gamer with no buttons pressed. And they go on to tell you more about how this actually works. It's just the fact that such an advanced system has been developed for something as apparently frivolous as computer games should come as no surprise. The industry is one of the most innovative and competitive, with each company attempting to move a step ahead of its rivals. That's nonsense. They all get the same technology at the same time at the top as given to them. Through cutting-edge technology, witness the success of the Nintendo Wii with its wireless computer or controller that reproduces physical movements on the screen and has resulted in a huge sales surge. The industry is also one of the biggest. Sales of computer games and handheld consoles have exploded over the past 5 years, with some analysts predicting it could soon be bigger than Hollywood in terms of turnover. Then they go on and on about the cost and the factors and so on. So how does the helmet work? In simple terms, it relies on the fact that every time a human thinks about something, electrical impulses are triggered in the brain. This has been known for years in the medical world and is the basis of an electroencephalogram, the EEG, the technique that measures the electrical activity of the brain by recording from electrodes placed on the scalp. Now, this is interesting because, you see, there's also another article came out at the same time. This one is using EEG technology, electroencephalographic technology. But what I mentioned about a month ago was that the Pentagon and the British counterpart had also set up virtual worlds with every human being that's registered in these virtual worlds. And they're gathering data on your personality. Now, here they're going a step further. They'll get much, much more. They'll get your brain pathways, etc., how you think as an individual, and that will be added to this virtual world, this matrix they're setting up, you see. And even though this one here is using EEG technology, there's another one coming out which is using ultrasonic type technology to go even further and try and record the pathways of your brain as well. Now that's going into what they call engrams. Engrams or pathways where your memories, etc., are stored. They want a virtual copy of you. That's what's coming. And this is what all this is for. It's nothing to do with amusing little Johnny. It's about getting to know little Johnny better than he knows himself. And to create a duplicate world which one day most people will all be in without knowing it eventually. It says here, Emotive claims to have refined the technique to isolate and identify the electrical patterns that are given off when humans think about a given course of action, such as moving their arm to the left or right, or depressing the right thumb or index finger. The Epoch helmet recognizes these electrical patterns and translates them into real movements on the screen. Now, that was done about 8 months ago, if you remember, that DARPA. Now, DARPA is not there to help you. DARPA is a big part of the National Security Agency and to do with Homeland Security, and they gave a PR blurb out on the media when they said they'd put a chip in a paraplegic's brain that allowed him to send emails to people by simply thinking about it. So here you go. There's no competition here. Everything's already done at the top and dished out to the ones down below. It says to look at the helmet resembles nothing so much as a novelty head massage gadget with several spidery arms curving around the head and meeting at the top. The arms are fitted with a total of 16 sensors positioned so they are in contact with the relevant part of the head and pick up electric signals in the brain. The system's software analyzes these signals and then wirelessly relays what it detects to a receiver plugged into the US B port of the game console or PC. Emotive says has mapped 12 specific actions that the helmet will recognize and can be reproduced in standard games. Now, you know that back in the 90s, in 95 I think it was announced in all major media, definitely here in Canada, that all communication devices, phones, faxes, computers, and so on, had to be accessible at all times, be made to be so by the manufacturers, to be accessible at all times by the security agencies, your governmental security agencies. And there's no firewall sold to the public or any other gadget that will stop them having access. They're built that way with back doors in them. And you can bet and take it to the bank as long as they're open, that they're going to store all the data on a whole generation of children who are growing up and have a complete personality profile put into this matrix system they've already put up and built and have operating, and they'll know, as I say, little Johnny better than Johnny knows himself. Predictive programming indeed, because for total control in the world, everyone must be completely predictable, getting to know you, indeed. So that's the world we're going into at a gallop, not by chance, not because they want to entertain you, not just for bucks at all, no. It's to control a society, to do with control, an ongoing, never-ending journey where man is the material, the base material, which can be remade and perfected and used as the masters see fit. That's what it's all about. Long-term agenda. It's interesting that Huxley and others talked about this coming world, and movies were made about it, where they showed you the interfacing in the Star Trek series too. They had the Borg there, and from adults' points of view, the Borg were horrific creatures, robotic creatures in a spaceship they called the Hive. The Hive, by the way, has been used in the military to talk about the general public. All public locations where people live, habitat areas, are called hives in the military now, and they get documentation when they're in an army base as to where to go in the hive, general population, for libraries and so on. And I'll be back with more of this after the following messages. am Alan Watt, and we're cutting through a matrix which is surrounding us all the time, step by step, and one day people will think they wake up. It'll be in a different world. They won't notice it, most of them, because they've been brought up with the fantasy of it, and now they live the fantasy, thinking they're in a real world, and they'll do real jobs in a physical world. They could be doing something rather nasty, like cleaning out a barn or something, but they'll think they're on the moon with James Bond and Skybreaker or something like that. That'll be the fantasy in their head. And as I was saying before the show, before the break there, that this was shown, as I say, that the Borg mentality was shown in the Star Trek series, and they had the cyborg characters as Borgs, where they were part machine but mainly human, and they were all interconnected to a centralized queen or computer, a mind, and they called it the hive. The whole ship was called the hive. That's what they're bringing into play. Now, if they can map your psychomotor patterns for the uniqueness that is you, remember, they can then reverse that flow and command your brain to act in certain ways, and you will get up and walk to where they tell you to walk to, maybe walk into a police cell and sit down, and you won't even know you've done it. And that's where it's all going, you see, the controlled society. Quite something. And people will flow into this without even noticing. Most of them won't notice. Many will actually enjoy it because they enjoy entertainment, enjoy fantasy. And they won't be able to tell the difference anymore. They're almost at that stage today. Now, Aldous Huxley, in 1961 said, and it seems to me perfectly in the cards that will be within the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will in fact have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it, because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda, brainwashing, or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. That kind of ties in with a statement that Mr. Rockefeller made when he talked about coming catastrophes and so on. And when he was asked about the people, how will they behave, he says, they'll come to us with perfect docility. Absolutely certain that they would. And no wonder, because we're all being drugged at the moment with all the spraying, and we're getting dumbed down by 1,000 different methods the general public are unaware of. Now, we've got Dan from California on the line. Are you there, Dan?
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Alex. Boy, it's great to talk to you. And, your subject is right on. I'm a video game developer from California. And when I started at Atari back in the 80s, we always used to joke because Atari was right across the street from Lockheed Missiles in Space.
Coincidence, eh?
And, we made games like Missile Command and Battle Zone, and we always used to joke that, there was a secret tunnel between Atari and Lockheed, and if anything ever happened, they just hooked these kids up to these games, and the gamers would control, these devices at Lockheed. We thought it was a big joke.
Yeah.
So the last game that I worked on was Call of Duty 4, right? It's for the Xbox 360. It's one of the biggest games out there. This Call of Duty game. Mm-hmm. And I can't even believe, I'm listening to your show, and I'm working on the game, and the game's, a first-person shooter, all takes place in the Middle East, mm-hmm. with all of these overtones and political overtones that you can think of coming from the Middle East.
The propaganda.
And, just by, and the server that we're working on, the whole game, it's called Huxley 6.
Oh, really?
I couldn't believe it. And just before the game starts, on each of the intro levels, they have little quotes. And quotes from who? Bertrand Russell, Plato. I'm surprised they didn't throw in Albert Pike.
He'll come down the road. Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I'm listening to your show, working on this game, and as we're working on this game, we're getting a parade of these politicians coming through.
Yes.
The mayor of Los Angeles, You know, the governor, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger's coming to the company to see how the game is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a game. It's
very important. It's very important to the ones at the top, and it's not the only company that's giving me information. They're doing this to all the major ones because they don't know it, but they're all working together. They're all working together because information is fed to higher levels and then fed down to you.
Well, I never wanted to believe this. I always defended video games, that they were outside of this, of the control of that system. You know, but this last game, I mean, parts of the game just made me sick to my stomach. You know, playing it triggers all of those psychopathic, you know, psychological triggers. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't get points for staying alive. If you just survive, you don't get points. You get points if you kill.
Yeah.
You know, it's designed this, and, you know, just the effects of the game was just, you know, it was just wild, you know.
Yes.
Anyway, you know, I was so shocked at you know, making this game and listening to your show, and I bookmarked your, you know, Cutting to the Matrix show on all the computers at the, you know, at the development company. I won't say the name, but everybody knows Call of Duty. If they're listening to your show, you know, they're going to be, you know, affected by that game. And I guess my question is, you know, you get all this stuff coming at you.
Yeah, hang on, and we'll finish this after the next break.
Thanks.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, Alan Watt back with Cutting Through the Matrix, and we're talking to Dan from California, who's involved in making some of these types of games, and you had a question you wanted to ask.
Well, I guess the question is, you know, I've been listening to this show for a while, and everybody calls in. You know, you have all this information about everything that's coming down. It's all true. You know, people ask me, where's the future of video games going? I say, go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com, and you'll find all about, you know, you'll learn all about the future of gaming. And people want, you know, like the question is, well, how do we stop this? What do we do about that? Mm-hmm. You know? And as I began to think about that, I thought, okay, well I'm going to study karate, you know, because we got the Blackwater guys moving in right down the street from us.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, okay, well, I got to get my kung fu together. And then thinking, well, these guys got bulletproof vests and M16. Yeah. You know, you better start going to the firing range, right? So then you start going to the firing range, but, you know, in order to fight these guys, you know, you have to shoot first.
Yeah.
You know, you can't wait to countershoot.
And see, this has been the problem all down through the ages. You always get the people at the bottom fighting the organized army from the people at the bottom, because they're just the offspring of us, you see, who are trained and brainwashed. And the guys at the top sit back and laugh at this because they don't take part in the actual physical stuff. But what they do need, and this is the big trick to everything, they need us to acquiesce to everything they want us to do in the society that they lead us into. And so, in other words, they need our permission. In fact, they want us to be enthusiastic about going into this brave new world. And we've got to start and turn around now in our private lives and start saying no to different things that they demand from us, regardless of how many people in the majority go along with it. Those who have functioning brains have to use them and simply say no. And you'd be surprised how that starts to grow. Most people are followers. I mean, when they see someone standing up and saying, no, that's enough in this particular direction or that direction, then they feel a bit more courageous, and they'll change allegiance to those who are standing up and saying no. And that's what we must do in a peaceable way, because they need us to acquiesce to every part of this agenda, or they lose it.
Well, that's the big question. You know, how do you fight the psychopath without becoming a psychopath?
You can't just become one, and you must use the traits they don't have. They don't have love for their fellow man, for instance. So you have to be real with yourself And if you truly feel the caritas, as they call it, for humanity, you must show it and let people know. And
what was that word?
It's all right to show it. It's all, see, the society that's been created has made us isolated, and so we're afraid of showing how we feel about other people. It's time that we regained that and brought it to the surface.
Alex, did you say caritas?
Yeah, it's love for your fellow human, basically.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of, I'm pretty, it's pretty scary to love one of these Blackwater guys coming through and saying, you got to have the chip.
Well, I'm not talking about I'm talking about the general public that you want to help, not these guys. These guys are conditioned, and when they've had enough slaughter and all the rest of it, it's only then the shock sets in and they go to pieces. That's what conditioning does. It's very scientifically done to them. They're like robots, and that's why in all the Star Wars movies that you had, the series of Star Wars, they're always portrayed almost like robots. They're faceless numbers. They're just uniform. That's what a uniform is. It's all becomes one. They're not individuals anymore. They're uniformly made. So you've got to bypass them and go to the ones above. And it's the ones who lead them and demand that you give allegiance to this system that you must stand up to and say, no, we're not going along with this because we know what's happening. These are the guys we must go to. The soldier at the bottom has got to be bypassed, or you simply have the guys at the bottom fighting the guys at the bottom, as always.
Yeah, you're really starting to go beyond, you almost go into spiritual, occultic type of, like a war that's happening, beyond the physical sometimes, I think,
We're in it. There's more to humanity than or at least there used to be for most, than simply the basic instincts. And they can be brought out again in people, too. We see this in times of real disasters, not the man-made ones. People naturally want to go and help each other. They do that naturally because it's a survival instinct. By helping others, you help yourself.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That's the only way with this kind of humane type of, this kind of empathy that you talk about on your show as almost like a weapon against a psychopath.
It is a weapon because what they have tried to do, they've been pretty successful, is to get everyone into a psychopathic culture of dog eat dog until we are isolated from everyone else, and we walk past people in the streets without helping them if they fall down. That's the society that's been created, and it's all wrong. It's not humane. It's not human or humane, and it's time that we regained that because we are capable of doing it.
Well, Alex, when I run into these guys, especially these, the politicians coming through with their security guys into my little game company, and they got real guns, my shackles go up, and, I want to stop them from hurting people.
Yes, and we've got to do it now before it gets to a stage where they will start hurting people, and that's what we see happening. They've made the superstructure, they're getting everything in place for something they know is coming, step by step, as they unleash a form of hell on us and then offer us the solution. And that's why the Department of Defense in Britain, the top think tank, projected nothing but riots by ordinary people in all countries for the next 20 to 30 years. What on earth do they have planned that's going to cause such chaos? Well, this is a 100 years war, according to Rumsfeld and others, and they plan to have their whole brand new system of the new Borg all complete by the end of that 100 years. So we've got to say, no, we're stopping it right now. That's enough.
Sometimes it makes me sick that I've been part of this. I made these games.
Well, this again is a system we're in. This darn thing called money, they've given people no other way to get through this system without money.
I had to do that to buy your DVD,
People get compromised. People become sharks themselves because they're terrified of poverty. That's what money does in a money system. You're terrified of poverty, and that's what makes you inhumane to your fellow man.
Well, I'm really happy that you have this show. It has the reverse effect of those games. Yeah. When I listen to your show, somehow I calm down, and I begin to think differently and read differently, and
it's deprogramming, and that's what we need is lots of deprogramming to regain that which we're capable of having. it's innate within us. It's time it woke up and regained its right in this world.
Yeah. Anyway, I hope a lot of my coworkers and are going to your website and looking at it. Because we're right. We're in the belly of the beast.
Yes, and a lot of people are compromised, and a lot of people are going through problems at the moment with their conscience as they understand what they're actually involved in. Yeah. So thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Bye now. And we've also got Steve in Ontario. Are you there, Steve?
Alan.
Hello, Steve.
Yes, I'm here, Alan.
Yeah, can you go ahead?
Good evening. And another example of what I think would be predictive programming. I know you touched on this last weekend. There's a game called Shattered Union, which is forecasted in the future. I think it's probably about 2015 or somewhere around then. And it talks about terrorism in the U.S. and martial law is the theme of the game, and how some of the states seceded from the U.S. Very interesting just to go to, if you were to search on Shattered Union, and you could see flash videos of the video game. I think it came out about a year ago.
Yep.
And it's almost like I said, a predictive program of what may be to come, which is interesting. And it may be a game that was released from some of the big game developers.
Yes, before that even came out, some years ago, there was a movie came out. I think Bruce Willis was in it. And I never went to see it because I knew exactly what it would be all about. And sure enough, it was a lockdown of an entire city by the military long before 9/11 came along. And it was getting everyone ready for what was happening today with the military in charge and martial law and all the rest of it. So this is all of these things together are parts of the same predictive programming, so that the generations who grow up in it, you realize that shortly young people will think it's always been this way, that you go into a subway and there's guys there with machine guns and all this and searching people. They'll think that's the natural way because it's all they will know. It's all they will know. And that's why we have to stop this now before that generation gets to that stage. Because once that's happened, the following generation, it will be even easier with them. That will be the natural, being searched and scanned and all the rest of it everywhere you go. And that's what they intend to do. And they're on their way. We've got to stop it now. And it's all predictive programming that they're giving these games out to the children, getting them ready for it. And they'll think nothing of it. It'll seem quite natural as we go into a totalitarian form of existing.
Now, there's a caller there from New York. It's Carlton. Are you there, Carlton?
Yes, Mr. Watt. How you doing?
Not too bad.
Love your work. Appreciative of what you're doing. I just wanted to touch on just the pornography and how it basically, like you always say, it separates the bonding process between male and female. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm 25 years old. I've watched plenty of pornos in my lifetime, and I can testify to how it has basically made, me myself look at women in a certain light and just basically look at them as a sexual object. And, we as men, we are going to be attracted to certain things about a woman, but the way it is now, it's like, and as a matter of fact, I think I mentioned this to you in an email once before, how women are like, they just, I can't even really get it out like how I want to, but it's like I said to you, like they don't need us anymore. Like,
yeah, they've been taught that too. Yeah.
Like, it's crazy, man. And it's like how everything, I have conversations about these subjects that you talk about all the time with my cousins in the house that I'm staying in now, and they are females. Yeah. And one of my cousins actually said to me that all women are whores in one way, shape, or form. And I had to tell her, I was like, man, I can't go for that, because me being a young man and actually seeing how things are working and how things are what things are leading to, that's not what I'm looking for. You know what I'm saying? So I'm that's like, right. And these are my older cousins, so they like, I'm like, damn, y'all not giving me any hope at all.
Yeah. Well, that's a key, and I have to remember, too, that big designers of the system are now in, and the culture they would create was Bertrand Russell, and he did experimental schools, remember, back in the, I think, 1920s and 30s. On behalf of the British Crown, he's allowed to promote sexual promiscuity with children who didn't even reach puberty, trying to see, the goal being, of course, is if they would have so much sex, they would never think of bonding with a person on an emotional basis. The idea was to separate the sexual act from the emotional bonding. And of course that was a fabric that kept society and families together. They wanted to destroy that so that the state would be in control of everyone, the male and the female, all split up to get individually helpless on their own. And of course, we're going to look at it from the women's side too. A massive attack from the 60s, speeding up through the 70s, was aimed at the women with the Bernays techniques, of course, and Bernays was involved in the early stages, to get women to be more sexualized. The pill was given to them. All the magazine articles were telling them they can do what they want. The miniskirts came in, the guys' tongues were hanging out and all the rest of it. And it's got so bad today, now the women are going out in gangs looking for a lay for the night, as they call it. And that's their weekend lay. I mean, they have literally separated the emotional bonding totally from the physical act, and that was the purpose. You're quite right. Yeah.
Yes, it's amazing, and the way you lay things out. I mean, I know I feel it in my heart for a fact that you are the real deal and what you're saying is real. But at the same time, I think sometimes I'm like, are these people really that sick? Because I mean, even on the whole pornography side of it, like. And you talk about the hermaphroditic agenda, and I've actually seen pornos with you know the transsexual shims. I guess you can. I hate to use that word, but yeah. And this message out there, like it's crazy to actually you wake up and then just really notice things, and then. You try to tell your family about it, and then they don't. It's like they just, like you say, they don't care.
They don't care, and they somehow think it doesn't affect them. But believe you me, even if you're not following the culture creators or what they're doing to you, even if you're not following them directly, those around you are, and what they do in their lives will affect you down the road. So it affects everyone, and. What you find now too is once they had given all the propaganda towards the women, and that's exactly what they said they'd do. The Marxists said the same thing. And we've got to remember that Russell, who was a British lord for the aristocracy, who was in with all the bankers of London, the city of London and all the rest of it, the Milner Group, he graduated into the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Council on Foreign Relations, also worked with the Macy Group that they brought in from Germany, and they also worked on the same projects of disassociating any mental obligation, emotional obligation or bonding from the sexual act, so that the people in general in their New World Order could be controlled. And they knew also it would cause tremendous fallout, because women still have the drive in them to have a child. As science comes in as a savior and says, we gave you the pill, you don't need men anymore, so even if you're older, just freeze your eggs. We can freeze your eggs and we can fertilize it down the roads and give you the type of child that you wish. So women have been bombarded with all this stuff until science becomes their god, basically. And they're, even though a lot of them end up going to therapists, they started training therapists to go out there, and because they knew the fallout down the road, which is happening now with women who've had the careers, they're burned out, they don't have a family, they have no offspring of their own, and they're depressed as can be.
And, oh man, you just touched on the subject right there, because and you brought up the man, I swear to goodness, like. Mm-hmm. I know you're not like a mystical man, but it's like you have a crystal ball sometimes, because I was just having a conversation yesterday with my older cousin who has a career, has no kids, and just like you just described, and we were actually talking about communism.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying that she read Marx and Engels, and she said she was liking it. But at the same time, I'm telling her, I'm like, oh, so you like no private property? Oh, so you like no family unit? Like, and she's sitting there like, yeah. But then at the same time, she makes statements that our family is dysfunctional and we don't get together as a family and do things. I'm like, how contradictory is that? Like, really look at what you're saying and then look at the thing. You're just contradicting yourself.
Yeah.
But
and what you've got too, see, we do have dysfunctional families because they have been bombarded with massive propaganda and indoctrination really since about the 1960s onwards, and it escalates all the time until they're copying the celebrities on television. They think everyone's got a better life than they do. They're never pleased with anything. That's what advertising's all about, of course. So you're never pleased enough with yourself. You're dissatisfied with who you are, how you look, what you have, and all the rest of it. And so couples are fighting all the time. And at the same time, they keep putting the young females on dancing away there at music television. Even the older guys sit and watch, and then they look at their wife and say, well, she's not like that. Well, your older wife is the same age as you. You're maybe even older. How do you look to her? So they both look at each other and they become dissatisfied because they created a youth culture. And I've met women in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, who try to dress up like they're 20-odd years of age because they know it's a youth culture and they hate being older. And women who start to get the first wrinkle in their face almost have a nervous breakdown. They feel they're becoming a non-person. Before that era came in, the older people were wiser, they had respect, and they had a big place in the community because they did have so much wisdom. So the wisdom now isn't passed on. We have older people today who still watch the same TV shows as the young, and they've nothing to pass on to children. They've no wisdom at all. So the war was waged on them, and it has been successful.
Yeah. But one more thing, Mr. White, and I'm gonna let you go. And it's kind of off a different subject, but I always wanted to tell you about this. I've pretty much came into this information within the past couple of years, so I'm pretty new to it. But I mean, listening to you has given me a very, very, I think, a pretty good understanding of what has been going on in the world, particularly with the governments and predictive programming and things of that nature. But sometimes you do speak on the video games and things like that. And I'm not going to lie, I'm still a product of my conditioning. I do still like video games. I don't play them as much as I used to, though. But there is a particular video game I wanted to draw your attention to that I've had pretty much for basically about like 4 years now. It's called Civilization Revolution. And now when you talk about the histories of civilization and all that stuff, I love it because it makes the most sense to me. But this is called Civilization Revolution. Of course, on the front of it, Napoleon is there. But you pick from all of the great civilizations, Egypt, Rome, Greece, Mongolians, Zulu, all the type stuff like that. And it's funny how it begins in 4000 BC, and you have to work your way to basically the way you win is this: is through domination. You have to take over the other civilization's capital city through military.
Yep.
You win it economically if you build the World Bank. You win culturally if you build the United Nations.
Yep.
And you win scientifically if you build a space station and then take it to up into space. But and it's crazy how throughout the game you have to learn different technologies and things of that nature. And one of the things that they list as a technology is religion.
Yep. Yep.
And when you get to religion, you actually get the fundamentalist type of government, and with that, you can actually your armies get extra boost in fighting skill. But it's total propaganda.
Sure. Yeah.
I just didn't And when I first got it, I just was looking for a game that I can build up a civilization or build up anything, basically. That's the type of games I was into. But
and then you end up with a world empire.
exactly. You end up with a world empire, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's crazy how it's just so predictive programming all through it. And you have, of course, certain, they call them great people, like Homer, Aristotle. They come to your civilization and they can give you perks, like if you get a builder, you can build certain wonders, and of course the pyramid is a wonder, the military-industrial complex is a wonder. It's crazy, all of the predictive programming that's out here.
Sure. It is.
In the space, like I actually did watch Space Odyssey today too.
Yes.
And somebody put a clip of your cutting through the reality check DVD that you did.
Yeah.
They did a clip of that, and then they did some clips of the Space Odyssey movie and how you were explaining it with the whole 8 men and the obelisk coming down and all that stuff. It's pretty good, but that's all I got for you. I just want to say this one more thing too. If you don't have any kids, you need to make some, because we need some people with your mind power coming through this mess, man. Because this is crazy. We need somebody to clear it up for us, man.
Yeah.
But thanks, Mr. Watt. I love you, and I'm gone.
You hang in there, then. Hang in there and call again. Thanks. Yeah, it's amazing. It truly is amazing what people are living through. Most of them don't even know it, how their thoughts come to them, how they reach conclusions or opinions. And it's Jacques Ellul said it was by osmosis. In other words, they hear it from all around. They're bombarded, and they don't know they're being propagandized. And again, predictive programming runs through every movie, every television series, every soap is predictive programming for you to emulate in one form, and also to think of things as being inevitable in another. It's amazing all the movies that churned out from the 80s through the 90s, kind of sci-fi about the future. They were all totalitarian systems that you saw. Every one of them was totalitarian, where you have the cops dressed in all their SWAT gear and body armor, and you always had the citizens with palm printing, iris scans, and all this kind of stuff. That they were just one after another, getting you ready for what was to come. And that's predictive programming. So when it does happen, you think, well, I guess it's inevitable, because the idea is familiar to you. It was pushed at the back of your brain via fiction, through fiction, when your guard is down and you don't realize that you're getting programmed. I'm not justifying them either. I don't support troops. I never have, in any country, supported troops, because I know what happens to them. I know what their purpose is. Remember, Kissinger said, he says that the American troops they're just dumb, stupid animals who are to be used for foreign policy. That's what they are, actually. He was right. He was telling the truth. When you go into the military, you are a dumb, stupid animal who's used for foreign policy, policies which you won't even be told about, you won't even know. You're taught the base level of propaganda to get a job done. You don't care who's benefiting from it, what the real plans are. The big corporations are going to steal everything out of the countries that you're helping to occupy. You don't care. You're quite happy being young and stupid and running around with a gun. You've become G.I. Joe. You now can have the big machine gun and act the hard man, when in real life you're generally a coward on your own. Ask them about their photographs, their bloodied photographs. Ask them if you've got the guts to do it, to see if you're still proud of little Johnny. I remember saying on a radio broadcast when they were going into Iraq, just before it, in fact, they showed you some PR shots of troops dancing, American troops dancing on a carrier ship on the way over, half naked, or some of them were naked, I think, to rap music. And I thought, we're sending I said this on the air, we're sending the barbarians in to one of the oldest cultures in the world. That's what it looked like to me. A few years ago, I read the statistics from the newspapers on police recruits, and it was over 90% in the US of all police recruits at that time were coming directly from the military into police, where once again they'll be allowed to throw off the normal restraints of societal control, and get turned loose on you and do what they want.